I never expected to find the letter that would unravel my entire life while organizing my grandmother's library. But there it was, tucked inside her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, yellowed with age and practically falling apart at the creases. My name is Riley, and until that moment, I was just a regular librarian living a predictably quiet life in suburban Massachusetts. The most exciting thing on my horizon had been my upcoming wedding to Ethan, scheduled for next spring. "Honey, do you really need to go through every single book?" Ethan called from the doorway of my grandmother's study. "The estate sale is in 2 days. "Just a few more," I answered, not looking up from the letter in my trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandmother's, but the words, they didn't sound like her at all. "My dearest Victor," the letter began, "what you've done is unforgivable. The heirloom was never yours to take, and your lies have torn this family apart. If you think I'll stay silent about what really happened that night, you're gravely mistaken. Riley." Ethan's voice was closer now. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. "I'm fine. Just dusty in here." But I wasn't fine. My grandmother, Margaret Lane, everyone called her Maggie, had passed away 3 months ago, taking what I thought were all her secrets with her. She'd never mentioned anyone named Victor, never hinted at any family betrayal. Yet here was evidence of something dark lurking beneath our family's polished surface. "We should take a break," Ethan suggested, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Get some lunch." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. There was only one person who might know about this Victor. My Aunt Maggie, my grandmother's sister-in-law, who'd mysteriously stopped coming to family gatherings 15 years ago. As I followed Ethan out of the study, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The text message made my blood run cold. "I see you found the letter. Your grandmother should have burned it when she had the chance. Some secrets are better left buried, Riley. Take my advice, forget what you read today." I glanced at Ethan, but he was already halfway down the stairs, completely unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. I looked back at the study, at the hundreds of books still waiting to be sorted, and wondered what other secrets my grandmother had hidden between their pages. Whatever this family secret was, whatever had driven my aunt away and haunted my grandmother until her death, I knew I couldn't let it stay buried. Not anymore. That threatening text message haunted me all night. By morning, I'd made up my mind to track down my Aunt Maggie, even though Ethan thought I was crazy for wanting to dig up old family drama. "I found her address," I said, showing Ethan my phone screen over breakfast. "She's only an hour away in Providence." Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You're not seriously thinking of just showing up at her door, are you?" "Why not? She's family. Family who hasn't spoken to anyone in 15 years, he reminded me, his voice carrying that careful tone he uses when he thinks I'm being irrational. "Besides, don't you have that wedding venue appointment today?" I pushed my untouched eggs around the plate. "I rescheduled it." "Without telling me?" His jaw tightened, but he quickly masked his irritation with a smile. "Look, I get that you're curious about this letter, but maybe there's a reason some things stayed buried." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Stay away from Maggie Lane. Last warning." My hands shook as I showed Ethan the message. Instead of looking concerned, he seemed almost relieved. "See, even more reason to let this go," he said, reaching for my hand. But I pulled away, something clicking in my mind. "I never told anyone about finding that letter. How do these people know?" Ethan's face went blank for a split second before he recovered. "Maybe someone saw you in the study? We were alone in the house." I stood up, suddenly feeling trapped in our sunny kitchen. "You were the only one there when I found it. Riley, you're being paranoid." He reached for me again, but I stepped back. "This is exactly what happened with your grandmother. She got obsessed with conspiracy theories near the end, remember? That stung. My grandmother had been sharp as a tack until the day she died." "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my car keys. "Where are you going?" "To work." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did have a shift at the library, but first I had another stop to make. 20 minutes later, I parked outside my grandmother's house. The estate sale wasn't until tomorrow, so I still had access. Something about Ethan's reaction felt off, and I needed to search that study again. As I unlocked the front door, a car slowly drove past. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the driver making a phone call. My hands trembled as I pushed open the door. Whatever secrets my grandmother had hidden in this house, it was clear I wasn't the only one looking for them. The study looked different in the morning light, emptier somehow. I'd spent an hour searching through the remaining books when I heard the front door open. Grabbing my phone, I ducked behind the heavy oak desk. "She's definitely been here," a man's voice said. "Not Ethan's. The desk has been cleared." "Find it," another voice responded. "Victor wants that ledger before the estate sale." My heart pounded so hard I worried they'd hear it. Ledger? I hadn't found any ledger, just that letter. Through the gap between the desk and floor, I watched 2 pairs of shoes move around the room. Check behind the books. The old lady was clever about hiding things. I closed my eyes, thinking of the text messages of Ethan's strange behavior. Everything connected to something called a ledger. My phone vibrated in my hand, Ethan calling. I quickly declined the call, but the sound echoed in the quiet room. The footsteps stopped. "Someone's here." I crawled toward the study's side door, the one leading to the garden. Just as I reached for the handle, my phone lit up with another call. The screen's glow reflected off the brass doorknob. "There!" I burst through the door, sprinting across the overgrown garden. Behind me, I heard shouts and pursuing footsteps. I vaulted over the low stone wall, scraping my hands but keeping my feet, and ran to my car. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys. As I bent to grab them, I spotted something familiar under the passenger seat. Ethan's phone. He must have dropped it yesterday. The screen lit up with a new message. "Victor Lane, did you find the ledger yet? Remember our deal." The world tilted sideways. I grabbed the phone, started my car, and drove away from my grandmother's house. Away from the men who were now standing on the lawn watching me leave. My mind raced with questions. What deal? Why was my fiancé working with the man my grandmother had called unforgivable? At the first red light, I scrolled through Ethan's messages with Victor. There were dozens, spanning months before my grandmother's death. The latest one made my blood run cold. The girl found the letter. Handle it, or the engagement's not the only thing you'll lose. The light turned green, but I sat there, cars honking behind me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about Ethan, about my family, it was all unraveling. And somewhere in my grandmother's house, hidden in those remaining books, was a ledger that everyone seemed willing to betray me to find. I pulled over and made a call to the one person who might have answers, my Aunt Maggie. It was time to stop running from the truth and start fighting back. Aunt Maggie's house wasn't what I expected. Instead of the rundown place I'd imagined, I found myself standing in front of a pristine Victorian with manicured gardens. Before I could knock, the door swung open. "I wondered when you'd show up," Maggie said, studying me with eyes identical to my grandmother's. "You look just like her." I held up Ethan's phone. "Did you know about this? About him working with Victor?" She glanced at the screen, unsurprised. "Come inside before someone sees you." Her living room was filled with photographs, dozens of them. My grandmother appeared in many, along with faces I didn't recognize. Except one. "That's Victor," Maggie said, following my gaze to a photo of a younger man standing beside my grandmother. They were both smiling, holding what looked like an antique book. Before everything went wrong, my phone buzzed. "Ethan again." I declined the call. "He's been looking for you," Maggie said, watching me. "Called here twice already. You're in contact with him?" "I'm in contact with everyone, Riley. That's how I've stayed alive this long." She moved to a cabinet and pulled out a familiar-looking book. "Your grandmother wasn't just keeping a ledger. She was keeping evidence." The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the window, I spotted Ethan's car. "Back door," Maggie whispered, shoving the book into my hands. "There's a garage behind the garden. Take my car." "But Victor's men will be watching your car. They followed you here." She pressed her keys into my palm. "The book will explain everything. Just remember, your grandmother wasn't protecting an heirloom. She was protecting you." The doorbell rang again, more insistent. "What about you?" I asked. Maggie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been handling Victor for 20 years. Now go." I slipped out the back just as I heard the front door open. Ethan's voice drifted through the house. "Where is she, Maggie?" "Who?" Maggie's voice was perfectly casual. I crouched behind a hydrangea bush, clutching the book to my chest. Through the window, I could see Ethan pacing, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. "Don't play games. Victor's getting impatient." "Victor's always impatient," Maggie replied. "Tell him what I've always told him. He'll never find it." "Find what?" "The real ledger." I froze. The real ledger? Then what was I holding? As if in answer, something fell from between the book's pages. A key, attached to a tag with an address I recognized. My grandmother's bank. Behind me, a twig snapped. I didn't turn to look. I just ran. The bank manager's face fell when I showed him my grandmother's key. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but someone already accessed that safe deposit box this morning." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I have the only key." He pulled up something on his computer. It was accessed by Susan Carter. She had the proper documentation as co-owner. Susan Carter, my grandmother's best friend. The same Susan I hadn't been able to reach since the funeral. I must have looked unsteady because the manager offered me a chair. "When exactly did she come in?" "About an hour ago." He checked his screen again. She seemed quite anxious to. The bank's front door chimed. Through the office window, I saw Susan herself hurrying toward the exit, clutching a large envelope. Our eyes met for a split second before she bolted. I ran after her, ignoring the manager's calls. Outside, Susan was already halfway down the block, moving surprisingly fast for someone in her 60s. She ducked into an alley and I followed. "Susan, wait." She spun around, pressing the envelope against her chest. "I'm sorry, Riley. I had to get to it before they did." "Before who did?" "Victor? Victor?" She laughed, but it was hollow. "Oh, sweetheart. Victor's just the puppet. He always was." A car engine revved at the alley's entrance. Ethan's voice rang out. "Susan, we had a deal." Susan grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a dumpster. "Listen carefully," she whispered, pressing the envelope into my hands. "Your grandmother knew this day would come. Everything you need to know is in here, but you can't trust anyone. Not even." There you are. Ethan appeared at the end of the alley, but something was different about him. The warm smile I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by something cold and calculating. "Riley, step away from her." "Don't," Susan warned, gripping my arm tighter. "He's not who you think he is. None of them are." "The ledger, Susan," Ethan demanded. "Now." I looked down at the envelope in my hands, then at the woman who'd been like a second grandmother to me, and finally at my fiancé, a man I suddenly realized I didn't know at all. "Riley," Ethan's voice softened, taking a step closer. "Baby, this isn't what it looks like. Just give me the envelope, and I'll explain everything." Susan's grip tightened. "Your grandmother died protecting those secrets, Riley. Don't let her sacrifice be for nothing." I had a split second to decide. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with secrets that had already cost me my engagement, my trust, and maybe even my grandmother's life. I made my choice. I sat in my car outside Maggie's house, staring at the contents of the envelope Susan had given me before she disappeared into the crowd. The ledger wasn't a book, it was a USB drive and a stack of photographs. Each photo showed Victor with different powerful people, all dated over the past 20 years. But it was the last photo that made my hands shake. My grandmother, Ethan, and Victor, taken just 2 weeks before her death. The front door of Maggie's house opened. She stepped out, looking unsurprised to see me. "You knew," I said, holding up the photo. "You knew Ethan was working with them before I even met him. Come inside, Riley. It's not safe out here. No more hiding." My voice cracked. "Tell me the truth. Was any of it real? Did he ever actually love me?" Maggie's face softened. "That's the tragedy of it all. I think he did." A car pulled into the driveway, Susan's. She looked exhausted, defeated. "They got to Victor," she announced, rushing past us into the house. "He's talking." Maggie cursed under her breath. "How long?" "Hours, maybe less. They know about the safety deposit box." I followed them inside, clutching the envelope. "What aren't you telling me? What was so important that my grandmother—" "Your grandmother didn't die of natural causes," Maggie cut in. She was getting too close to exposing everything. The corruption, the bribes, all of it. Victor's just the face. There are powerful people behind him who've spent decades building this network. And Ethan. Susan wouldn't meet my eyes. They recruited him years ago before he met you. It was supposed to be a simple job. Get close, find the evidence, eliminate the threat. My legs gave out. I sank into a chair, the world spinning. "He was sent to kill me?" "No," Maggie said sharply. "He was sent to spy on you, to get close to your grandmother through you. But then he actually fell in love, and that complicated everything." Headlights swept across the windows. Multiple cars. "They're here," Susan whispered. Maggie moved quickly, grabbing her keys. "Take the back door." "There's a—" The front door burst open. Victor walked in first, followed by 2 men in suits. And behind them, looking like his heart was being torn in two, Ethan. "Hello, Riley," Victor said smoothly. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." I clutched the envelope tighter, looking at Ethan. His eyes were red-rimmed, pleading. "Riley, please," he whispered. "Just give it to them. I can't watch you die too." The USB drive felt heavy in my hand as I stood up. You want the truth, Victor? Here it is. I walked to Maggie's laptop on the desk, every eye in the room following me. But first, let's see what's actually on this thing. Victor's smile faltered. That won't be necessary. Oh, I think it will. I plugged in the drive, my hands steady for the first time in days. My grandmother wasn't just keeping records of your corruption. She was building a case. The screen came to life, displaying dozens of folders. Financial records, photographs, emails, 20 years of evidence. Riley. Ethan stepped forward, but Victor's men blocked his path. Don't. You know what I can't figure out. I clicked through the files, watching Victor's face grow paler. Why kill her now? After all these years? Because of me, Susan said quietly. I was finally ready to testify. Victor laughed, but it sounded hollow. You have no idea what you're dealing with, little girl. Your grandmother made the same mistake. She didn't make a mistake, I snapped. She made a plan. I turned the laptop around, showing them all the email that had just arrived. And it's already done. Victor lunged for the computer, but Maggie was faster. She grabbed it, backing away. It's too late, Victor. While you were chasing us around town, everything on this drive was being uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the state. The sound of sirens filled the air. You're bluffing, Victor snarled, but his men were already backing toward the door. Am I? I held up my phone, showing the breaking news alert. My grandmother taught me something important. The best way to protect the truth is to share it with everyone. Victor pulled out a gun, pointing it at me. Delete it. Now. Victor, don't. Ethan moved between us. It's over. It's not over until I say it's over. The front door burst open. Police flooded in, weapons drawn. In the chaos, Victor tried to run, but Ethan tackled him. The gun skittered across the floor, stopping at my feet. As the police led Victor away, Ethan approached me slowly. I wanted to tell you everything, but they were watching. I couldn't risk. I held up my hand. Save it. We're not done talking about this, but right now there's something I need to know. I pulled out the photo of him with my grandmother. That day, 2 weeks before she died, what really happened? His eyes filled with tears. She knew who I was, Riley. She knew all along. And she made me promise that when the time came, I would choose you over them. He reached for my hand. I chose you. I'm still choosing you. Outside, more sirens wailed. The truth was finally coming to light, but I had a feeling the hardest conversations were still ahead of us. 6 months after Victor's arrest, I stood in my grandmother's study, now restored to its former glory. The shelves were filled again, but this time, each book had been carefully examined, each secret brought to light. Ready? Ethan asked from the doorway. I nodded, holding the last piece of the puzzle, a small wooden box Susan had given me yesterday. Inside was a letter and a key, both from my grandmother. My dearest Riley, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've already learned that the truth isn't always what we expect it to be. The real heirloom was never the ledger or the evidence. It was this key to a future without secrets. The key fit perfectly into the lock of my grandmother's antique writing desk. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal filled with family stories, hopes, and truths, both beautiful and painful. She wanted you to have this, Susan said, appearing behind us. To write your own story, without the burden of past betrayals. Maggie joined us, looking older but lighter somehow. Your grandmother believed that real justice isn't about revenge, it's about breaking cycles. I touched the empty pages at the end of the journal, thinking about all the stories yet to be written. Ethan's hand found mine, his engagement ring back where it belonged, though we both knew our relationship would never be the same. It was stronger now, built on hard truths rather than comfortable lies. There's something else, Susan said, pulling out another envelope. Victor wanted you to have this. Inside was a confession, not just about my grandmother's death, but about the decades of manipulation that led to it. He'd written it from prison, a final attempt at his own version of truth. I placed it in the desk drawer unlocked. Aren't you going to read it? Ethan asked. Maybe someday, I replied. But right now, I'd rather focus on writing our own story. As everyone left the study, I opened the journal to its first blank page. The truth about family, I'd learned, wasn't in the secrets we keep or the lies we tell. It's in the choices we make when those secrets finally come to light. I picked up my grandmother's favorite pen and began to write. The thing about truth is that it never really ends. It just changes shape, becoming something new with each generation. This is where our story begins. Behind me, a book fell from the highest shelf, Pride and Prejudice, the same copy where I'd found the first letter. As I picked it up, a small note fluttered out in my grandmother's handwriting. Sometimes the best endings are really just new beginnings. Choose wisely, my dear. I smiled, understanding at last what she'd known all along. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be lived.